Maybe I'll zoom on this one. So today we're gonna do lab 6, which mostly focus on your Windows utility. As we talked about some of these utilities before, but also gives you some additional information. I know we talked about reverse ARP, but we didn't really touch on proxy ARP or gratuitous ARP or inverse ARP. So there are additional information on these functionality for ARP. See you later. So if you want to set up a proxy device, basically to regulate ARP requests, you can, and that will be considered your proxy ARP. And it would offer its own MAC address, right, as the destination. So that's one way that you can use proxy ARP. Gratuitous ARP, this is going to be allowing you to have a host that's going to announce update, right? So that will be kind of like a teacher in the room saying, hey, you know, by this time we should be having this IP and MAC address, right? So it is another system that you can implement to be able to update the machines with new information for IP and MAC address. We talked about the reverse already, but the inverse. So this is going to be used IP address to find the MAC address. So that's a way that we can identify which system, right? Just having one address. So if you only have one address as information, you would need to use inverse ARP. Okay. So, we're gonna use the virtual machine for most part, right? If you're not using your laptop, you're gonna connect your drive. So I'm using this drive. I open up the CIS40A VM folder. Inside it, I just need to copy the Windows 10 VM onto the desktop, which I have, and that would take about 5-6 minutes. And then from there, you just need to open up the folder, its subfolder, and then you can double click the blue file. At this point, when you double click the blue file, it's gonna load your app, which is your VirtualBox, with your virtual machine onto the playlist here. Then before I start, I want to make sure I give it enough RAM so that way it's responsive, right? Nothing worse than the VM that's not even, you can't even click in. You saw this with your server last time, right? So we're going to select it, change the setting by clicking settings. And then we're going to go in and making sure that we are in the general tab. On the bottom, you can change this to 8,000 or 8 gig of RAM. And then the processor, I'll keep it as a quad core. That's okay. You can give it a little more if you want, because I have 16 CPU. I'm just going to keep it as quad, but just give it more RAM. And then click OK. So once I have all the settings ready to go, I'll just go ahead and click Start, and it will take a few minutes to boot. So that will take care of the load VM in VirtualBox part. And we're going to start with F when we log in. So once you log in, the main tools that you're going to use today is going to be Windows Command Prompt. So you're going to use the utility ask commands in Command Prompt. And then you are going to also use PowerShell. Just keep in mind that PowerShell is case sensitive, space sensitive. How you type needs to be exactly as it is. Unfortunately, I didn't enable copy and paste, but it's really good, bless you, to type the correct command. And so by the end of this session, right, the end of this class, I want you to be able to include some of these utility onto your resume, right? Like for troubleshooting purposes, you can say network troubleshooting using ping command, or, you know, to be able to access ARP utility. So those are the things that we want to be able to learn so that way we can apply and put that on the resume for job purposes. Okay. So once this opens up, we're going to log in, all caps, with an exclamation point. So our course number and the exclamation point. Now, always run it inside your VM, right? Sometimes we think, because they look kind of similar, right? So in your VM, I already logged in. I'm going to start with this section of the exercise. I should label that part A and part B, but we're going to open up command prompt. So in my VM on the Windows search bar on the bottom, just type in CMD. Okay. And I'm going to change the property so you can view it a little better. But if you want the pop-up to be bigger, you can go into the properties and I'll make the font a little bigger. Okay. All right. So in my command prompt of my virtual machine, remember that it's in your VM. I'm going to run ARP lowercase space -a, which allows me to display, right? Now, the system doesn't have a lot of connection. As you saw, my laptop looks a little different because I have a lot of websites open, or I had established services for web. So you're gonna see some of the basic, right? When you see the physical address there, that's your MAC address in the middle, right? Your IP address is located on the left. So it tells me that at some point, this system right here, you see this is a broadcast address, right? And you see that the physical address is also a broadcast address. Why? Because I mentioned to you last time, when you see F, right, in hexadecimal, that's using addresses, and if it's a series of them, likely that they're broadcast address. So you would have corresponding IP that's broadcast and MAC address that's broadcast. Okay. And then I do have other entry for connection, right? That is IP here. So this system connected to this IP address, and this is the MAC address for this system. Okay. And they are all static. There's no dynamic entry in my ARP table. So how many interface addresses are shown? Do you just need to count them up? So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. See you later. So just answer that question. I have 5. Now I can delete my ARP entry by using ARP-D, right? Which flush the cache entry. So let's lower my VM here. So and then step 3, what we're going to do is we are going to delete. So ARP-D. And it tells me that it's failed, right? So it requires elevation of privilege. Okay. Now that means that, remember that I logged in as a user, right? Student user, right? So at this point, if we issue this command as an administrator of the system, then it will be able to run it. So how can I get around this? Who knows? Run as administrator. Run as admin. Thank you. Right? Easy. So I just simply close command prompt. I can reopen it as an admin, right? So CMD, before I click open, run as administrator. And then it's firewall's going to tell me, are you sure? Say yes. So and when you look, you see the path is different, right? An admin has access to system 32 directory, whereas when I was on as a regular user, when I just open command prompt to run, so you see that there's different privilege requirement, right? So now I can repeat ARP-A to look, and then ARP-D to delete. And it allows me to delete. I no longer have the error, right? Because now I'm the administrator. So if you run command prompt as a regular user, likely that you cannot delete the entry, right? That's just a security implementation for Microsoft. Now that should be carried the same, and you should control this so that way people don't delete your cache. All right, so we deleted it. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna try to see if we can also run the -G to see if the output is the same. So up arrow key, change the D to a G. So it's not the same, right? It also showed me, is it the same as the other one? Well, the other one, because it was longer, we had deleted, right, some of the new entries. So it's still gonna show you the interface for my system, which is this is the IP address I'm using. And this is the connected IP addresses and MAC addresses. Okay. So yeah, you're gonna get the same information ultimately, whether you're using a -G or a -A. A is normally more typical and more commonly used. So you can also have the same information displayed. Okay, so that should take care of that question. So if I'm trying to clear the cache, I simply can do a -D. Now I'm going to go ahead and let's clear it again. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and do a set. So we are going to put in this IP address and this MAC address. So basically I give that to you, but if you want, you can also try another type of address or another system address. Okay, so we're going to do an ARP-S, and we're going to enter the IP address first. So 172.49.0.100. Okay, and then follow that space and then type in the MAC address 08-00-27-31-3D-00. Let me change that to uppercase. So want to verify and make sure everything matches. Okay, so it should be able to take that, right? So you can manually set up your entry by using a -S, by adding it to your table, your ARP table. So now if we do a -A again, right? If we did it successfully, we should be able to see it, which we did, right? So the earliest entry, which is the latest entry, it's gonna put it right here. But also it's because of the internet address ascending sort. But anyway, so you see that that's the manual entry that I just did, right? So it doesn't matter if I put it uppercase, lowercase, see how it puts it in the lowercase when it gives it to me. So Windows command prompt is not particular about that, but in other system, you want to pay attention to that. So were you able to enter that? Yes, right? Take a screenshot. Now we're going to check for our system computer name. So when you use a host name, basically that's going to give you a computer name, right? So host name. And it should output the information. Now I just use the default, right? But if you have an administrator that prefers like theme-based name, like location or whatever, you would see that there. So this is a desktop and that's the host name information. So you can record your system name. Now we're gonna do a path ping. So path ping basically follow a host name or an IP, but it is a ping and a trace or trace route combined. So path ping does multiple things. It checks the status of the connection, but it's also following that traffic. Okay, so we're gonna ping ourselves using path ping. So you're gonna do a path ping 127.0.0.1. And you notice that it's gonna look similar to your trace route with the hops information. Why is it not a lot of hops? Well, it's just my computer to my computer. So it's just gonna no hop, right? Really, it doesn't really have to leave any kind of router. But if you are doing pathing with other systems, right? Other domains, other system, you would see that it would have more information. So see you. So ultimately, you can use path ping, right, with the public domain or internal system. It gives you the trace route information, statistic information, along with doing a ping with that, right? So you're seeing the trace complete, more on like tracing the traffic. Okay, so here you should be able to say how many hops were shown. So 0 hop, technically, because we didn't have to leave the router to come back to our own system. Does the output contain your system information? It should, right? It gives me the desktop name. Now we're going to use nbtstat-r, which is what we talked about in our lecture. So let me leverage this so I can see and show you. Okay, so for the next step, step 9, you're going to do nbtstat, one word, -r. And it doesn't really have any kind of NetBIOS information that is resolved or registered. But in the case that if you're using NetBIOS with WinServer, right, because I haven't joined the system to our domains or connected to a server, so I don't really have any kind of resolution. So it shows that you have 3 broadcasts. It has to kind of advertise so that way it can find either itself or other systems that's with it. So it's registered by broadcast is 3, but everything else is 0. Now, if you check this on other system like, you know, NBC desktop, that's a little different with the statistic there, right? Because if the systems is using Wins or it have registration with NetBIOS and resolve through names, you would have more information or value, higher value here. Okay. So we would then put down the broadcast information, and I have name server for the DNS 0 there. Okay, now we're going to close command prompt, and you can just type in exit and it will close. Now for the next PowerShell, you also need to do run as administrator. Otherwise, you won't be able to obtain information with the command that you issue. So know that PowerShell, when you obtain details and information, it's a get function. And when you are adding information to the system, it's a set function, right? Typical C developer type of approach. So what we're going to do is we are going to open up PowerShell for step 10. Let me close this so I can have more desktop room. Now to open PowerShell, simply search for PowerShell in the Windows search bar. But before you open it, make sure you click Run as Administrator. Otherwise, you're going to get error and you have to close it and reopen it again. So search for PowerShell and click Run as Administrator. Say yes, right? And let's change the font. So some command on PowerShell is the same as command prompt, but for the most part, it uses different commands. Now, PowerShell is very important in Windows administration. So if you are applying as a sysadmin, or if you are managing Windows servers, a lot of the time they require these skills. So now this particular exercise is only gonna allow us to obtain and access some of the information that's the same thing as the utility. So I try to put in the details for you. So when you use a getNetNeighbor, you've seen this before, right? Basically you are obtaining link information for that system to its neighbor, right? So it will include IP address and the link layer address, which is the physical address or the MAC address of the system to its nearby system or its network systems. Okay, so we're gonna type in as is with all the caps in tail, and it color codes it for you. So here you are going to see your IP address, but as you notice, it gives you also version 4 and version 6. So the version 6 are here and the version 4 is here, right? And you can count them up in how many to answer that question. So take a screenshot. So how many entry do you have? And you notice that these don't really have your link layer address. So we talked about how those are. So concatenated, you see that with the double colon. We touched on that last week, so you kind of see. And some of these are permanent address and some of them are stale. The stale ones are going away or it's no longer being used, right? So do you have, so for me, I have one that is stale, one that is unreachable, which is the one that I've added before. That could be a non-connected system information, or it also, this is your default gateway for the configuration. But yeah, so you do have some statistic information for the state or the information for the state of the connection. Now, I'm going to use a pipe in the next command to separate or combine two commands onto one line. So a pipe usually allows us to combine two separate commands so that way we can have only one output. So we're going to do a getNetNeighbor again. So I just up arrow key and add to it. So hit a shift and then the pipe is above your enter key. And then we're going to do a format dash list property with the wildcard.
Didn't have a space between list and property.
Yeah, thank you. I'm catching that now. Sorry. There's a space after property and there's a space before the hyphen property. Make sure you do that. Otherwise, it's gonna complain you saw that I had the error. So we're gonna get the entry, right? And what we want to do is using the second part of the command when we add the type is to format it into like more of a table format. So that way it's more top down. So it's easier to see than horizontal because sometimes it cuts off on or you have to scroll all the way to the right. So the format option allows you to put it into a list and then pull all the property information. So it's basically gonna dump a bunch of properties, right? For each of the connection entry. So how is this output different than the previous command? Well, you added an additional piece to your command, which allows you to format your output to a list that contains property, right? And so it is different than what you saw in the previous command in that it wasn't formatted to output a certain way. Okay, so if we want to check, you can repeat the command and then like getNetNeighbor is different than getNetNeighbor format list. So this gives you more of a top down, more details, of course, right? For each of your connection entry. Okay. Now we are gonna do the next one. Yeah. Question?
Don't know if I'm typing it. It's format.
Yeah, so the hyphen is attached to the property in the back.
This is how I do it, but it still comes out as
Do you add the wildcard?
What's the wild part?
The asterisk.
Oh, I didn't.
After property, hit space and then the shift A. Yeah, it tells you to add the wildcard there. So it would just be anything following property.
Okay, now.
Yeah. Okay, now we're gonna look at specifically IPv6 with the entry. So instead of using ARP, right, you can use getNetNeighbor in PowerShell. That's the whole point in this part of the exercise. So that way you can get more information from PowerShell. So let me scroll down all the way or just keep. So if you just type on the next one, we're going to do a getNetNeighbor and we're going to do a dash address family IPv6. And so now we are just filtering only IPv6 addresses. Okay, and if you recall from last week, right? So where's your suffix? I had this question earlier. Where's your suffix for your address? Let's say if I look at this address, where's my suffix?
One block visibly has one.
Here. At F02.
Isn't that the first block?
Yeah.
Here.
But why is it the first block? That converts to what? That part of your address, right? So can you convert that into a certain slash number? We did that last week, didn't we? That was too back in the cobweb to kind of search, right? All right, go back and look at last week's notes. Okay, so look at your IP addresses and determine your suffixes. Now, some of you might have more, right? Like I have 2. So the FE08, that's different than FF02. You see the distinguish the difference, right? So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna filter only the reachable connection. So we're gonna do a get net neighbor. Sorry, I had accidentally delete more than I intended. And we're gonna do a dash state. We're only gonna look at the state that is reachable. And we're gonna do get net adapter. Oh, okay. So when it's throwing an error, when you run this reachable one, it's only because if you look at my state, I don't have anything reachable, right? So it's not able to find anything reachable. Now you can also change this. Let's see if we can change that to permanent to see if it finds it. So instead of reachable, if we put in permanent, right, it will find some, right? So it's going to complain a little bit. So if you do the reachable and you're getting a bunch of red error, that's common. It's because, right, you don't have a reachable entry, okay? Now, if you filter and change this to permanent or stale or something like that, you can filter based on those. So the whole goal in this is to show you how you can put in parameters, right, for the function to be able to filter your output. Okay. Now, if I don't have whatever that I'm trying to filter, of course, it's going to tell me error. It cannot find the things that I want it to find. It's kind of like tell someone to go look for something that doesn't exist, right? It doesn't exist, so it's gonna throw you a bunch of red arrows saying no, it cannot find it. But if you modify this to something that's part of your state, right, like permanent or stale, you might be able to filter those. Okay. So when you get an error for the reachable command, that could be common. That's okay. Bye. Okay, so I put down here that it only filtered based on the state that is listed. So let's say that if I change this to stale, right, it's gonna find the stale. There's only one for me. But if I do permanent, it might throw some error in the middle, as you can see in the last one right here. So I want you to be able to see the difference, right? I get a lot of questions throughout the years about that. Like, oh, I did your command, but it's throwing an error, right? Because it tells you here, if you read the error, it says object not found, reachable state. So if your list doesn't contain reachable, then it cannot find reachable, period. Right? So whatever the state, like permanent or stale, or whatever that is here, that you can filter. Right? You cannot filter something that doesn't exist. Any question? Okay, so for that step, we just need to count up the entry. If you're getting an error, you can say 0 entry for reachable. Okay, so you have permanent and one stale, so. Get net neighbor. State. Adapter. Yeah, net, you misspelled the net in ET. That's fine. Get net adapter, the second part, make sure it's NET. Did that work?
Okay, cool. It's, the thing.
Yeah. It also,
That's the one
yeah, it
there.
pulled that one. And then you can try the permanent. It might complain in between, but it'll pull most of it. Okay, so for the last part, we're gonna look at TCP and UDP connection. So as you learn, UDP is user datagram protocol. That is connectionless, right? It doesn't do a lot of verifications in the process of communication, so it doesn't need to verify that it's connected, right? There's no retransmission in the case that if it's not getting there, then it'll just stream based on the fastest, and we do this for performance. So I want you to be able to really see, right, when you come across UDP and TCP, and if you have a flood or if you have an attack like DNS amplifications or port scan when they scanning you, right? You can check your connection state and see. And so they can spoof packets by arbitrarily modify their own address to your network address. And we need to make sure that we follow, right? And verifying the information that's communicating from that particular system. So what you can do is you can use a command called get net TCP connection, right? And then you can look at what kind of state you're going to receive for 14. Okay. So we're going to do get net TCP connection. Make sure you type all upper lowercase as is. And you're going to get system connection, port information, remote port state. We saw some of this when we looked at our table earlier, right? So you are gonna get, netstat. Netstat's gonna give you like port and connection and the state of the connection, whether it's listening or close wait, etc. So we can count up how many. Your system, it doesn't have a lot of connections, so technically you can count that up, but I just make you to do it so that way you can look at all your entry. So you would see how many entry. Do I have any kind of close wait? No, right? You might have some close wait if something is pending. So if you have something that is trying to connect but delayed, you would have some kind of close wait state there. Okay, so 0 for me. Now I wanted to see if I have any connection that has been established, right? So we can check, and you can basically repeat the command by up arrow key and then add to it -state establish. So again, it's gonna throw me an error. Why? Because I don't have anything established, right? On my laptop, you saw when I did netstat earlier, yes, I had established, but on this particular virtual machine, there's no established. It's just waiting. It's listening, but there's nothing established as far as connection. So yes, I'm gonna get an error when I run that command establish because nothing on my list is established. There was no successful communication for certain packets. So let's try to see if we modify establish to listen. Yeah, if you do listen, in my case, right, I get all the listen. See? So the whole point is if you want to filter, make sure you filter or look for the things that are on your list. If it doesn't exist on your list, you're going to get an error in PowerShell. Okay? So I have no established connection, but when I did the listen, it pulled all the listen entry. Now I'm gonna go ahead and look for any connection that would be related to internet setting connection for TCP. So we're gonna do a get TCP connection, and we are gonna do apply setting internet. So I don't have, because the virtual machine you're using, it has a static IP, which doesn't have internet connection. Some of you asked me about this a couple weeks back saying that, I don't have internet on this IP. When we look at the setting, right? So you automatically cannot connect. You can try to open your browser on it, it won't connect, right? So you don't have any applied setting for the internet. Now, how can I change this, right? I can change it by literally taking off the static IP on the VM. I'll show you where that is. Okay. So open up settings. And then go to network and internet. See how it says no internet access? That's why you're getting an error for that step, this step 16. Okay, because you don't have internet connection for it, or never established any kind of internet connection. So I went to settings and I click on network and internet. If you want to take your system from static IP to dynamic IP and then restart it and rerun that command, you might have internet. So go to Ethernet, right? You can double click here and then click edit. And actually, I want to do it through control panel, which is easier. So control panel, network, and internet, you saw this before, right? And then you just go to view network status and task, click on Ethernet, change its property, take to IPv4, and here's the static IP, right? And then if we select obtain and obtain from the regular DNS from our CCD network, so you just need to toggle it to the first option instead of using the static IP. Click close. And yeah, you should have throughput at that point. You should see some kind of data coming through. Right? See? So your virtual machine has a static IP that I had put in manually, which is not allowing us to connect to the RCCD network. So what I did was I went to control panel and took off the static IP, right? So control panel, network and internet. We've seen this before a few weeks ago. Go to status and task, and then Ethernet. Remember how we viewed the IP address in here? So if you go in here and change it into a dynamic IP from DHCP, I select this option now because it had an IP address here. So I change it. I took it, so click on IPv4 and then I select the first option, obtain IP address automatically and obtain DNS server address automatically. That will allow it to have internet connection.
What if mine already
Are you getting an error for this one?
Yeah.
Yeah, so now I have it. So you probably just make sure that it has internet connection, and now I have internet. Yeah. Yes. Oh, you were just stretching. Oh, you did not need me. Okay. I thought you needed me. So as I mentioned, right, you can put it into dynamic IP, which is what I did, right? I went to the Ethernet connection and I changed the IPv4 to obtain from the DHCP. So I select this option and the DNS option. And I just want to make sure that it has internet connection. You can check with your browser also. But now when I run that net TCP connection with the apply internet setting, it should show me the HTTPS and HTTP ports. So so you would see some kind of remote ports. So what kind of remote ports do you see for web? Port 80, port 443, that's common for HTTP and HTTPS. So 443 is HTTPS and port 80 is HTTP. Okay. And then now, once you have that information, so my computer, when it connects to the web server, it's using these dynamic ports. And then for the web server, it would be these ports, right? And it would say establish internet connection. So if you don't have internet connection, you're gonna get the red error like what I had here, right? So I just allow it to have internet connection by taking it out of static IP address. So if you want to leave it as error and not change anything, that's fine with me. But I just want to show you, you can do it. Okay, next we're going to do UDP endpoints command. So now we're going to do a get net UDP endpoint. Okay. So it gives me both, right? Version 6 and version 4 IP address along with the ports. So these are the connections for UDP, right? Earlier, the few steps earlier, we were looking at TCP. So now you have UDP connection. So if you did it correctly, you should be able to identify the ports, okay? So identify the ports that are associated with your IP address. I don't need you to write down all of these ports, right? So my IP address right now is 10.0.2.15. That is a default virtual machine IP address for Windows and Linux here, right? So I would have port 1900, port 138, port 137. And then if you look at this entry right here, right, I have a dynamic port, so 51125. So you don't have to write down all of the others, right? You just need to focus on the one with your IP address. So that one and these last three. Now, if we want to filter out just the loopback address, we can go ahead and do that. So up arrow key and we'll just add local address and 127.0.0.1. And so we only gonna filter the traffic for the loopback address, which leaves me only 4 entries. It should be very minimal because a lot of the traffic is not. Are we doing okay? Okay, so the port that you need to record is the ones, that's a static IP. So that's why you get the error when you do the internet established connection because you have a static IP, so it doesn't connect to the internet. Okay. Now what we can also find is all the UDP settings. So you can use getNet UDP setting, which gives you the information about your dynamic ports. So getNet UDP setting, no S. And so it tells you the range of your start port is this number, and the port range number of ports. These are the number of ports that you can dynamically obtain is the 16,384. But it's gonna start here, right? So sometime you would use that number or a little bit higher, or sometime in that range. Okay, so it's a pretty big range, and you would see that with your local ports here. You see, when you look at your local ports, right, for UDP, right, it matches up in this range. So if we look at the local ports here, right, that will be starting in between 49 something, and it has 16,384 ports. So it is in that port range. Okay. Okay. So I want to show you that you can use a ping command in PowerShell, but in the ping in PowerShell, it's called test connection. Yes, you can also do ping, like command prompt, but test connection is another command that you can use. So it's an alternate command to ping. Okay. So test connection, and we can just use our loopback address. And it's nice because it also gives you version 6 address, version 4 address, the byte size, but Windows does 4 packets. So you're going to get the results for 4. But unlike the ping command, it doesn't give you too much statistic in loss packets or anything like that. So it has a way to show you just the connectivity. Okay, so that's slightly different than your regular ping command. Can I just do a ping, right? 127.0.0.1. I sure can. Same thing as command prompt. But test connection just gives you like a slightly different output, but you do see that it's an established connection. Okay, so my loopback address is equivalent to, this is my system IP. This is a loopback address, right? This is my IPv6. So test connection gives you actually the system IP addresses compared to ping, where it gives you only that reply from your loopback address. So the source is going to be your host name, right? So to answer that question, what is the source? Your source is your system, but by its name, computer name. How many bytes were sent for the packet? If you go across, 32 bytes. By standard, Windows only use 32 bytes in the regular ICMP packet. But again, right, we saw earlier that you can force it to have a different size by doing the length and changing the length with the ping command. Okay, so now we can only do the host name, right? So I'm gonna run host name real quick to get my host name, right? You can use host name in PowerShell as well. And I'm gonna do step 23. Test connection. I think this should be uppercase. Right here. Let me check. I think so. And then I'm just gonna type or insert this host name, the host name that I have for my system. Desktop 7NGB8T5. So I'm sorry, the test connection, just make sure it's a capital C. But yeah, so you can do test connection with your computer name, or you can do test connection with an IP address or loopback address if you're testing its own system, right? Your own system. And so we want to compare the result from this step to the IP address or the loopback address. It's the same. It's the same system, so you're gonna get the same output. But the main difference that you can see, right, is that the destination, you notice right here, instead of the 127, the loopback address, it just plugs in the computer name. So when you do a test connection with the computer name, the source is the same, right? The destination, it replaces it with the computer name. Whereas if you do it with the loopback address or an IP address, your destination is the address. But the result is the same. This is a way that we can test our own system if it's connected. Okay? So now you should know how to use PowerShell for something that's equivalent to ARP, right? And netstat. Isn't that cool? Windows is my jam. So I told most of you, right? The cert that got my foot in the door was I was a Microsoft certified expert that got my foot in the door for as a technician. But you know, to move up the ladder, I had to get other certifications to become an admin. Yeah, I mean everybody has a different path, right? So I hope you practice. I know it's a one-time thing for a lab, right? And it's gonna get stored in that cobweb corner somewhere.
Yes, yes.
But we wanna pick it out and reuse it, because that's the whole point of these things, is to help you know and practice. Okay, let's stop recording. And I'll stick around for help. You should have an hour